A millionaire farmer's life is forever changed when he discovers a dying woman in his wheat field during a violent storm. Who is this mysterious woman? What secrets does she hold? And how will her presence unravel decades of buried truths that connect two powerful families? The events that follow will test his beliefs, challenge his past, and ultimately lead to revelations that leave everyone in tears. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The thunder rolled across the vast plains of Oak Ridge County as Jackson Montgomery guided his truck down the muddy access road cutting through his estate. The driving rain reduced visibility to mere feet, transforming the golden wheat fields into a dark, shapeless mass. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the thousands of acres that had been in the Montgomery family for 4 generations. Jackson gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles whitening. After 15 years away building his agricultural technology empire in Chicago, the last place he wanted to be was back at Montgomery Farms. Yet here he was, summoned by his father's enigmatic will and a series of cryptic notes that had arrived exactly 1 month after the old man's funeral. "Unfinished business," the note had said in his father's unmistakable handwriting. "The eastern field holds the truth." The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as Jackson slowed, approaching the turnoff to the eastern acreage, the oldest and most productive section of Montgomery Farms. Something about his father's instructions felt urgent, compelling him to check this area first, despite the punishing storm. As he drove alongside the eastern field, the rain momentarily eased. Jackson rolled down his window, allowing the petrichor, that distinct scent of rain on dry earth, to fill his senses. For a brief moment, unwelcome memories flooded back. Running through these fields as a boy, his father's rare words of praise during harvest, the bitter argument that had driven him away. A flash of lightning illuminated something unusual among the wheat, a splash of color that didn't belong. Jackson stopped the truck abruptly, squinting through the rain-streaked windshield. There it was again, something white against the dark earth. Without hesitation, he grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the deluge. The rain immediately soaked through his expensive dress shirt, a remnant of the board meeting he'd rushed from that morning when the caretaker called with concerns about trespassers. Jackson trudged through the mud, his city shoes sinking with each step. The beam of his flashlight bounced across the swaying wheat until it caught what had drawn his attention. A woman lying motionless in the field, her white dress muddied and torn, her dark hair splayed around her pale face like a halo. "Hello? Can you hear me?" Jackson called, breaking into a run. As he reached her, his breath caught in his throat. Despite the mud and rain, there was something hauntingly familiar about her face. She was young, perhaps in her early 30s, with delicate features that seemed to belong in the pages of a classical painting, rather than face down in his wheat field during a thunderstorm. Jackson knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. It was there, but faint and erratic. Her skin felt ice-cold beneath his fingers. Carefully, he turned her over, sheltering her face from the rain. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes of such intense blue that Jackson found himself momentarily stunned. Those eyes focused on him briefly, with a mixture of fear and recognition, before she whispered a single word that turned his blood cold. "Montgomery." Then her eyes closed again as she slipped back into unconsciousness. Without hesitation, Jackson lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her slender frame limp against his chest. As he carried her toward the truck, something fell from the folds of her dress, a small golden key attached to a tarnished chain. Jackson pocketed it quickly and placed the woman gently in the passenger seat. The drive back to the main house took less than 10 minutes, but to Jackson it felt like hours. Every few seconds he glanced at the mysterious woman, looking for signs of improvement or deterioration. Who was she? How did she know his name? And what was she doing in his field? During one of the worst storms of the season, Montgomery Manor stood at the highest point of the property, its Victorian architecture a testament to the family's long-standing wealth and position. As Jackson approached, lights flicked on in the windows one by one. Martha Simmons, the estate's longtime housekeeper, appeared at the front door, her expression shifting from welcome to alarm as she saw the unconscious woman in his arms. "Mr. Jackson? What in heaven's name—" "No time to explain, Martha. Call Dr. Reynolds. Tell him it's an emergency," Jackson instructed as he carried the woman inside. "The guest room on the first floor is ready," Martha said, quickly recovering her composure and leading the way. The room, like everything else in Montgomery Manor, was elegantly appointed, but frozen in time. Jackson had insisted that nothing be changed during his 15-year absence, whether out of respect for tradition or a stubborn resistance to his father's memory, he couldn't quite say. "She needs dry clothes," Jackson said, as he gently laid the woman on the bed, "and plenty of blankets. She's freezing." Martha nodded, already moving toward the adjoining bathroom to retrieve towels. "The roads to town are flooded, Mr. Jackson. Dr. Reynolds might not be able to get here tonight." Jackson ran a hand through his rain-soaked hair. "Then we'll have to do what we can. I remember enough first aid from my time in the Peace Corps. Hypothermia is the immediate concern." As Martha worked efficiently to remove the woman's sodden dress and wrap her in warm towels, Jackson built a fire in the room's ornate fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across the walls, illuminating the family portraits that hung in heavy gilt frames. 4 generations of Montgomerys staring down with expressions ranging from stern disapproval to benevolent distance. "Mr. Jackson," Martha called softly, "you might want to see this." The housekeeper had removed the woman's dress completely and wrapped her in several blankets. But she was pointing to something on the woman's right shoulder, a small birthmark. In the distinct shape of a crescent moon, Jackson felt the floor tilt beneath him. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I thought the same thing," Martha replied, her voice tight with emotion. "But I've only ever seen that birthmark on one family." "The Blackwoods," Jackson finished, naming the family that had been entangled with the Montgomerys for generations, first as business partners, then as rivals, and finally as bitter enemies after the tragedy that had driven Jackson away 15 years ago. Martha nodded grimly. "The last I heard, Elena Blackwood had died in the fire along with her parents." "Apparently not," Jackson murmured, studying the unconscious woman's face more carefully. The Blackwood estate had burned to the ground just weeks before Jackson left for Chicago. The fire had claimed the lives of Thomas and Margaret Blackwood, along with their teenage daughter Elena, or so everyone had believed. Could it really be her? Martha wondered aloud. After all this time? "I don't know," Jackson admitted. "I barely knew her. She was just a child when I last saw her. But if this is Elena Blackwood, that raises more questions than it answers." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their speculation. Through the window, Jackson saw headlights approaching. Not the doctor's familiar sedan, but a police cruiser. "I didn't call the sheriff," Martha said, confusion evident in her voice. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Neither did. Jackson straightened his still damp shirt. "Stay with her, I'll handle this." Sheriff Dale Wilson stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hat brim. Though only in his 40s, Wilson's face bore the weathered lines of a man who had seen more than his share of human tragedy. He'd been a deputy when Jackson left Oak Ridge. Empty, and the two had crossed paths occasionally during Jackson's rare visits home for holidays or business. "Evening, Jackson," the sheriff said, removing his hat as he stepped into the foyer. "Quite the homecoming you've got with this storm." "What brings you out in this weather, Sheriff?" Jackson asked, leading the man into his father's study, a room he'd been avoiding since his return. Wilson glanced around at the book-lined walls, the massive oak desk, and the collection of antique farming implements that had been Howard Montgomery's pride and joy. "Got a call about a disturbance out. This way. Missing person possibly headed toward Montgomery land." Jackson's spine stiffened. "Missing person?" "Young woman," Wilson confirmed, fixing Jackson with a steady gaze. "Walked out of Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital about 6 hours ago. Psychiatric ward. Staff is mighty concerned given her condition and this weather." "I see," Jackson said carefully. "And you think she might be here?" "One of my deputies spotted someone matching her description walking along Route 27 earlier today. That's just a couple miles from your eastern border." Wilson paused, studying Jackson's face. "You haven't seen anyone unusual around, have you?" Jackson hesitated, weighing his options. His instinct was to protect the woman. Eleanor, if that was indeed who she was, until he understood more about the situation. But lying to law enforcement would only complicate matters. "Actually, I found a woman unconscious in my eastern field less than an hour ago," he admitted. "She's here now, still unconscious. I've called for Dr. Reynolds." Wilson's posture changed, immediately becoming more alert. "I need to see her, Jackson. This woman might be dangerous to herself or others." The hospital was pretty vague on details, confidentiality and all that, but they made it clear this is serious. Jackson nodded reluctantly and led the sheriff to the guest room. As they entered, the woman on the bed stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Those startling blue eyes widened in terror at the sight of the sheriff's uniform. "No!" she gasped, attempting to sit up. "Please, no more hospitals. They're looking for me there. They'll find me." Wilson stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Wilson. No one's going to hurt you. We just want to make sure you're safe." "You don't understand," she whispered, her gaze shifting to Jackson, imploring. "The key! Did you find the key?" Jackson felt the small golden key burning a hole in his pocket. "Yes," he said simply. "Then you know why I'm here," she said, strength returning to her voice. "Your father promised to protect me. He promised to keep the truth safe until it was time." Wilson looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "Miss, what's your name?" The woman sat up straighter, gathering the blankets around her with a sudden dignity that transformed her appearance, despite her bedraggled state. "My name is Elena Blackwood, and if you send me back to that hospital, you'll be sentencing me to death and burying the truth about what really happened to my family forever." The room fell silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the persistent drumming of rain against the windows. Sheriff Wilson removed his hat again, turning it in his hands as if the motion might help him process this unexpected development. "Elena Blackwood died in the fire 15 years ago," he said finally. "I was there. I saw the bodies myself." "You saw what they wanted you to see," Elena replied, her voice steadying, "just as Jackson's father saw what they wanted him to see. But Howard Montgomery figured it out eventually. Too late to save his own life, but not too late to save the truth." Jackson felt as if the room was spinning slowly around him. His father's death 3 months ago had been attributed to a heart attack, sudden but not suspicious given Howard Montgomery's age and health issues. But Eleanor's words suggested something far more sinister. "Sheriff," Jackson said firmly, "I think there's more going on here than either of us understands. Given Miss Blackwood's condition, I'd like to offer her sanctuary here until Dr. Reynolds can examine her and we can sort this out." Wilson frowned, clearly torn between procedure and the unusual circumstances. "The hospital has legal custody." "Based on what authority?" Jackson interrupted. "If this woman is who she claims to be, she was declared legally dead 15 years ago. I doubt the hospital has proper documentation for holding a dead woman." It was a legal gambit, and not a particularly strong one, but Jackson could see it gave Wilson pause. "1 night," the sheriff conceded finally. "She stays here tonight under your responsibility. Tomorrow morning, I'll be back with the hospital administrator to sort this out properly." He turned to Elena. "And ma'am, I'll need a statement from you about where you've been for the past 15 years and how exactly you ended up declared dead." Elena nodded, though Jackson noticed she'd begun trembling again beneath the blankets. "Thank you, Sheriff." After Wilson left, promising to return at first light, Martha brought a tray of hot soup and tea. Elena accepted it gratefully, though. Her hands shook so badly that Martha had to help her with the first few spoonfuls. "I'll stay with her, Mr. Jackson," Martha offered. "You should get some rest yourself. It's been a long day." But Jackson shook his head. "I need some answers. First." He pulled a chair close to Elena's bedside and sat down, studying her face. Now that the initial shock had passed, he could see the resemblance to the Blackwood family, the distinctive blue eyes, the high cheekbones, the determined set of the jaw that had been Thomas Blackwood's trademark during business negotiations. "The key," Jackson said quietly. "What does it open?" Eleanor glanced toward Martha, hesitation evident in her expression. "Martha has been with my family for over 40 years, Jackson assured her. "If my father was involved in protecting you, or some truth, Martha would have been part of it. You can trust her as I do." Elena nodded slowly and took a sip of tea before speaking. "It opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Oak Ridge, box number 1215. Your father arranged for it after he discovered what really happened the night of the fire." "And what did happen?" Jackson pressed. "I can't tell you everything, not yet," Elena replied, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But I can tell you that the fire wasn't an accident, and my parents weren't the only victims that night. There was a third body in our house, someone who was never mentioned in any official report." "Who?" Jackson asked. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Someone who looks enough like me that, in a fire that severe, identification would be difficult, especially if no one was looking too closely or asking too many questions." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Someone had deliberately killed the Blackwoods and staged Elena's death as well, or at least been willing to let the world believe she had died. "Why?" Jackson demanded, leaning forward. "Why would anyone do that?" "The Eastern Field," Elena said, her voice suddenly urgent. "Your father's note must have mentioned it. That's why you were out there tonight, isn't it?" Jackson nodded, surprised. "How did you know about that?" "Because I helped him write it," Elena revealed. "Just like I helped him arrange the safety deposit box. We knew that if anything happened to him, you would be the only one who could finish what he started." "Which is what, exactly?" Jackson asked, frustration edging into his voice. Elena's expression softened. "Finding the truth about why our families fell apart, about the partnership that was destroyed, about the land that holds secrets worth killing for." She paused, struggling to keep her eyes open. "But I can't. I'm not strong enough tonight." Martha stepped forward, gently taking the empty teacup from Eleanor's hands. "She needs rest, Mr. Jackson. The doctor will be here in the morning, and you can continue this conversation when she's stronger." Jackson wanted to protest, but he could see that Elena was fading fast, her brief surge of energy depleted. "Tomorrow, then," he conceded, standing. "First thing in the morning, we'll go to the bank." Elena nodded sleepily, already drifting off. "Be careful," she murmured. "They're still watching, always watching." As Jackson turned to leave, Martha caught his arm. "Sir," she whispered, "there's something else you should know. While you were speaking with the sheriff, I found this sewn into the lining of her dress." She pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. Once back in his father's study, Jackson unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It was a map of Montgomery Farms, dated 15 years ago. The eastern field was circled in red, with a series of coordinates written in his father's precise handwriting. Beneath the coordinates was a single sentence: "The agreement must be honored." Jackson stared at the map, his mind racing. What agreement? Between his father and Thomas Blackwood? And what was so important about the eastern field that both his father and Elena had emphasized it? He poured himself 2 fingers of his father's finest bourbon and moved to the window. The storm had subsided somewhat, though rain still fell steadily. In the distance, he could just make out the shadowy outline of the eastern field where he'd found Elena. For 15 years, Jackson had built his life away from Oak Ridge County, away from the weight of the Montgomery legacy and the painful memories of his final days here. He'd created a successful agricultural technology company, revolutionizing farming practices across the Midwest. He'd made his own fortune, separate from the Montgomery wealth. He'd convinced himself that he'd moved on. But standing in his father's study, with Elena Blackwood, a ghost from the past, sleeping under his roof, Jackson knew that the past was far from finished with him. Whatever secrets lay buried in the eastern field or locked away in safety deposit box 1215, they had already claimed too many lives. His father, the Blackwoods, perhaps others he didn't yet know about. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep gonging reverberating through the house. Jackson drained his bourbon and made a decision. He wouldn't wait until morning. The eastern field had already been waiting for 15 years. It could wait a few more hours, but the safety deposit box couldn't. First National Bank would be closed, of course, but Jackson knew the bank president, Charles Whitman, personally. A substantial donation to Whitman's annual charity golf tournament should be enough to secure after-hours access to the vault. As Jackson reached for his phone, a movement outside caught his eye. A beam of light swept across the edge of the property, a flashlight moving with purpose toward the main house. Dr. Reynolds arriving at last. But the light was coming from the wrong direction, not from the main road, but from the path that led toward the eastern field. Jackson dimmed the study lights and watched as the beam drew closer. It wasn't one person, but two, moving stealthily, pausing occasionally as if to check for observers. They weren't headed for the front door, but seemed to be circling toward the side of the house where Eleanor's room was located. With a surge of adrenaline, Jackson grabbed his father's old shotgun from the gun cabinet and moved silently through the darkened house toward Elena's room. He found Martha dozing in a chair beside the bed, while Elena slept fitfully, murmuring incoherent words. "Martha," Jackson whispered, shaking the housekeeper gently. "Wake up, we have visitors." Martha was instantly alert, years of service having honed her responses. "Who?" "I don't know, but they're not coming to the front door to announce themselves." Jackson handed Martha his cell phone. "Call Sheriff Wilson, then get Elena to the safe room in the cellar. You remember how to access it?" Martha nodded grimly. The safe room had been built during Prohibition, when the Montgomerys had briefly dabbled in bootlegging. Few people knew of its existence, a fact Jackson was now profoundly grateful for. As Martha gently woke Elena and helped her to her feet, Jackson moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. The intruders had reached the house and were now directly below Elena's window. In the dim light, Jackson could make out dark clothing and what looked disturbingly like the outline of a gun. These weren't casual trespassers or curious locals. These were men with a purpose, and Jackson strongly suspected that purpose involved Elena Blackwood. His suspicion was confirmed when one of the men produced what appeared to be a syringe, holding it up for his companion to see. The message was clear. They weren't here to kill Elena, at least not immediately. They wanted her alive. "They're coming in," Jackson whispered urgently to Martha, who had just helped Elena into a robe. "Go. Now." As Martha guided a still groggy Elena toward the hidden passage that would lead them to the safe room, Jackson positioned himself behind the bedroom door, shotgun at the ready. He had no intention of shooting anyone if it could be avoided, but these men had come armed to his home in the middle of the night. They had forfeited the benefit of the doubt. The window latch jiggled softly. Amateur work, Jackson thought. The Montgomery Manor windows had been fitted with silent alarms during his father's more paranoid later years. Somewhere in the security room, a light would be flashing now, though with no one monitoring it, the alarm served little purpose. The window slid open with a faint scrape, and a dark figure slipped into the room, followed immediately by a second. They moved with the confidence of men who had done this sort of thing before, heading straight for the bed, only to find it empty. "She's gone," the first man hissed, his voice unexpectedly cultured. "Check the bathroom." As the second man moved toward the bathroom door, Jackson stepped out from his hiding place, shotgun leveled. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said calmly. Both men whirled, the first reaching for what was definitely a pistol at his waist. Jackson pumped the shotgun once, the universal sound of imminent danger. That would be an even worse idea. The men froze, assessing their options. Up close, Jackson could see they weren't the hardened criminals he'd first imagined. Their clothes were too expensive, their manner too controlled. These were professionals of some sort, but not the kind who typically broke into rural farmhouses. "Mr. Montgomery," the first man said, his tone shifting to something almost cordial, "this is an unfortunate situation. We're not here for you." "You're trespassing on my property in the middle of the night with weapons," Jackson replied. "That makes it very much about me." The second man, taller and leaner than his companion, spoke up. "The woman you found today is dangerous, Mr. Montgomery. She's escaped from psychiatric care and is suffering from severe delusions. We're here to return her to the facility where she can receive proper treatment." "And you are?" Jackson asked. Not lowering the shotgun. "Dr. James Erickson," the man replied smoothly, "Chief of Psychiatry at Oak Ridge Memorial. This is my colleague, Dr. Bennett. Doctors who break into homes and carry syringes and firearms," Jackson said skeptically. "Should I be impressed with Oak Ridge Memorial's commitment to house calls?" "The situation is complicated," Dr. Erickson said. "The patient has a name," Jackson interrupted. "Elena Blackwood." A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed Erickson's features before his professional mask returned. "That's what she calls herself, yes. But I assure you, Mr. Montgomery, that woman is not Elena Blackwood. Elena Blackwood died 15 years ago. This woman is suffering from a delusional disorder in which she has assumed that identity." "Then you won't mind if we sort this out in the morning, with Sheriff Wilson present," Jackson suggested, though his tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion at all. "I'm afraid her condition requires immediate intervention," Dr. Bennett said, taking a small step forward. "She missed her evening medication. Without it, she could become a danger to herself or others. Surely you don't want to be responsible for—" The distant wail of a police siren interrupted him. Both doctors exchanged quick glances. "You called the sheriff," Erickson observed, his cordial tone hardening slightly. "As any law-abiding citizen would when finding armed intruders in their home," Jackson confirmed. "Now, gentlemen, you have two options. You can wait here and explain to Sheriff Wilson why you broke into my house in the middle of the night. Or you can leave the same way you came in, and we can pretend this awkward encounter never happened." For a moment, Jackson thought they might choose the former option, but then Erickson nodded curtly. "We'll go. But this isn't over, Mr. Montgomery. That woman needs help, professional help that you can't provide. For her sake, I hope you'll reconsider in the morning." Without another word, both men slipped back through the window they'd entered. Jackson watched as their flashlight beams retreated rapidly across the property, heading not toward the road where the sheriff would be arriving, but deeper into the Montgomery lands, toward the eastern field. The significance of their direction wasn't lost on Jackson. Whatever secret lay in that field, it was connected to Elena Blackwood, and important enough that someone would send armed doctors to retrieve her in the middle of the night. Jackson secured the window and headed for the cellar, where Martha and Elena would be waiting in the safe room. As he descended the stairs, the family portraits lining the walls seemed to watch him with new intensity. Generations of Montgomerys who had built this legacy, this land, this wealth. And somewhere in that legacy lay a truth so dangerous that people had died for it, and others might still. The safe room door was disguised as part of the wine cellar's stone wall, operated by a hidden mechanism that Howard Montgomery had proudly demonstrated to his son decades ago. Montgomery ingenuity, he'd called it. Jackson pressed the specific brick that would trigger the door to swing open. Inside, Martha sat beside Elena on a small cot, one of several emergency beds stocked for a scenario that Howard Montgomery had considered far more likely than the present situation. Probably nuclear war or communist invasion, given the cold. War era when the room had last been updated. Elena looked up as Jackson entered, her eyes clear now despite the ordeal. "They found me," she stated simply. How? I don't know, Jackson admitted, setting the shotgun aside. But they're gone for now. Sheriff Wilson is on his way. We can't be here when he arrives, Elena said urgently, standing up. Though still pale, she moved with more strength than Jackson would have expected. Wilson is a good man, but he can't protect us from what's coming. And what exactly is coming, Ms. Blackwood? Jackson asked, his patience wearing thin, because so far all I've gotten are cryptic warnings and mysterious keys. My home has been invaded, my father is implicated in some conspiracy, and I'm starting to think I might be harboring a psychiatric patient who really does need professional help. The harshness of his words brought a flush of color to Elena's cheeks. You want answers? Fine. The Eastern Field contains evidence of what really happened 15 years ago. Evidence that would destroy certain powerful people in Oak Ridge County if it ever came to light. Your father discovered it 3 months ago, which is why he reached out to me in the hospital, and it's why he's dead now, instead of explaining this to you himself. You're saying my father was murdered? Jackson asked, the words feeling strange on his tongue. I'm saying Howard Montgomery discovered that the fire that supposedly killed my family wasn't an accident. It was an execution. Just like the heart attack that killed your father wasn't natural. Elena's voice broke slightly, but she steadied herself. He died trying to bring the truth to light. Are you going to let his death be for nothing? The distant siren grew. Louder, then cut off abruptly as the sheriff's cruiser presumably reached the main house. Mr. Jackson, Martha said quietly, there's a delivery entrance from the cellar that leads to the old carriage house. Your father's truck is still parked. There, if you're going to leave, that would be your best option. Jackson looked at the elderly housekeeper in surprise. Martha had been the epitome of propriety and rule-following for as long as he could remember. For her to suggest essentially fleeing from the sheriff was entirely out of character. Unless... You knew, Jackson realized suddenly. You knew about all of this, about my father's involvement, about Elena. Martha's weathered face showed no guilt, only a quiet resolve. Your father trusted me, Mr. Jackson. He said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you found your way to the truth. I didn't know how it would happen, but when you carried Miss Blackwood through that door tonight, I knew it was time. The choice crystallized before Jackson in that moment. He could stay, explain everything to Sheriff Wilson, and trust in the justice system to sort things out. Or he could take a leap of faith, trust in his father's judgment, in Martha's loyalty, in the desperate conviction he saw in Elena Blackwood's eyes. Martha, tell the sheriff we left to take Elena to the hospital in Riverdale. It's father, but better equipped. That should buy us a few hours. Jackson turned to Elena. We're going to the bank first, then the Eastern Field. I want all the answers, not just the convenient ones. Elena nodded, relief evident in her expression. Thank you. As they slipped out through the cellar delivery entrance and into the damp night air, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line that would forever divide his life into before and after. Whatever truth waited in safety deposit. Box 1215, whatever secrets lay buried in the Eastern Field, they would change everything. The rain had finally stopped, but the air hung heavy with moisture as Jackson helped Elena into his father's old truck. Above them, the clouds had begun to part, revealing a crescent moon that cast an eerie light across the Montgomery estate. A perfect match for the birthmark on Elena's shoulder. the mark of a truth long buried, but finally ready to emerge from the shadows. The old truck bounced along the back roads of Oak Ridge County, headlights cutting through the lingering mist. As Jackson took a circuitous route toward town, he deliberately avoided the main highway where Sheriff Wilson might be patrolling, instead navigating the network of farm roads he'd memorized in his youth. Beside him, Eleanor sat in tense silence, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. First National. "We'll have security cameras," Jackson said, breaking the silence. "If these people are as connected as you suggest, showing our faces there could be dangerous." Elena nodded, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "You catch on quickly. Your father mentioned you were sharp, said you got your mother's intelligence and his stubbornness." The mention of his parents sent an unexpected pang through Jackson. "You spoke with my father often." "For the past 6 months," Elena confirmed, her voice softening. "After he discovered me at Oak Ridge Memorial, he visited regularly, disguised, as a volunteer chaplain. The hospital administrators never suspected, but Howard was always careful. He knew they were watching him." "Who are they?" Jackson pressed, taking a sharp turn onto a gravel road that would lead them behind the town's main street. "You keep saying they without names." Elena exhaled slowly, gathering her thoughts. 15 years ago, our families were partnering on something revolutionary, something that would have transformed Oak Ridge County and beyond. The Blackwood scientific expertise combined with Montgomery resources and land. "I remember the partnership," Jackson said. "Though my father kept the details private, I was more interested in getting away than understanding the family business back then." "The Eastern Field was the key," Eleanor continued. "What my parents discovered there—" She stopped abruptly, her body tensing. "There's a car behind us, no headlights." Jackson checked the rearview mirror. Sure enough, a dark sedan was maintaining a consistent distance behind them, running dark. "Hold on," he muttered, pressing the accelerator and taking a sudden turn onto an even smaller access road, little more than a dirt path that ran between 2 cornfields. The sedan followed. "They found us already," Elena whispered, fear evident in her voice. Jackson's mind raced. The truck, though reliable, couldn't outrun a newer vehicle, especially on these rough back roads. They needed an alternative strategy. "There's an old hunting cabin about a mile ahead," he said, accelerating. "Further despite the rough terrain. My father and I used to stay there during deer season. If we can reach it, there's a root cellar with an emergency exit that leads to the creek bed." Elena braced herself against the dashboard as the truck bounced violently over the uneven ground. "Your family thinks of everything, doesn't it?" "Montgomery paranoia has its advantages," Jackson replied grimly. The headlights briefly illuminated a small wooden structure nestled among a stand of oak trees, the hunting cabin, unchanged in the 15 years since Jackson had last seen it. He cut the engine and light simultaneously as they approached, letting the truck's momentum carry them the final distance. "Run for the cabin," he instructed as they rolled to a stop. "I'll be right behind you." Elena didn't hesitate. The moment the truck stopped, she was out the door and sprinting for the cabin, moving with surprising agility for someone who had been nearly unconscious just hours earlier. Jackson grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and followed, pausing only to retrieve a key hidden under a fake rock near the porch steps. Another Montgomery tradition. The pursuing vehicle had slowed, its occupants apparently realizing their quarry. had stopped. Jackson could see its silhouette at the end of the dirt track, idling as its occupants assessed the situation. Inside the cabin, dust sheets covered the sparse furniture. The air smelled of disuse and the faint mustiness of a space too long sealed. Jackson locked the door behind them, though he harbored no illusions about how much protection that would provide if their pursuers were determined. "The root cellar," he whispered, directing his flashlight beam toward a trapdoor partially hidden under a threadbare rug. "Quickly!" Elena helped him lift the heavy wooden door, revealing a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. The root cellar had been expanded years ago when Howard Montgomery had gone through his survivalist phase, creating an underground space stocked with emergency supplies and an escape tunnel that emerged in the creek bed 100 yards away. As they descended, Jackson heard car doors closing outside, soft, deliberate sounds that confirmed their pursuers were approaching. He lowered the trapdoor carefully, then secured the interior bolt that his father had installed. The root cellar was cool and smelled of earth and concrete. Shelves lined the walls, still stocked with canned goods and survival supplies that had to be at least a decade old. A narrow cot stood in one corner, beside a small ham radio setup that Jackson doubted still functioned. "Your father really was prepared for the apocalypse," Elena remarked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He believed in being ready for anything," Jackson replied, directing his flashlight toward a narrow passage on the far side of the cellar. "That tunnel will take us out to Willow Creek. From there, we can follow the creek bed to the old mill road. It's about a 2-mile walk to town." Above them, muffled footsteps moved across the cabin floor. Both froze, listening intently. A man's voice, too indistinct to make out specific words. Another voice responding. Then a louder sound, furniture being moved, doors being opened. "They're searching," Elena whispered unnecessarily. Jackson nodded and motioned toward the tunnel. "We need to move." The tunnel was narrower than Jackson remembered, forcing them to proceed in a half-crouch. The earthen walls occasionally gave way to sections reinforced with timber supports, evidence of his father's meticulous attention to detail. The air grew progressively damper as they neared the exit. "Almost there," Jackson encouraged, as Elena stumbled slightly in the darkness. His hand caught her elbow, steadying her. Even through the fabric of her borrowed sweater, he could feel she was trembling. "Are you all right?" "I haven't been outside the hospital grounds in almost 3 years," she admitted. "Before that I was elsewhere, moving around, hiding." She took a deep breath. Freedom feels strange after so long. Jackson wanted to ask more questions. Where had she been for the 12 years before the hospital? Who had been pursuing her? Why had she eventually ended up in psychiatric care? But the narrow confines of the escape tunnel weren't conducive to extended conversation. "We'll have time to talk once we've secured the contents of the safety deposit box," he promised instead. The tunnel exit was disguised as a drainage pipe, partially obscured by thick undergrowth that had grown even denser in Jackson's absence. They emerged into the shallow waters of Willow Creek, which barely reached their ankles after the recent rainfall. Moonlight filtered through the trees, providing just enough illumination to navigate by. Jackson oriented himself quickly. The creek flowed north to south here, and town lay to the east. They would need to follow the creek bed for about half a mile before cutting across to intersect with the old mill road. They moved as quietly as possible, mindful that sound carried easily across water. For 20 minutes they proceeded without incident. The only sounds, the gentle gurgle of the creek and the occasional rustle of nocturnal wildlife in the underbrush. Then Elena froze, her hand gripping Jackson's arm with surprising strength. "Listen," she whispered. At first, Jackson heard nothing unusual. Then it registered, a methodical splashing sound, moving upstream toward them. Someone else was in the creek bed. Without a word, Jackson pulled Eleanor toward the eastern bank, where a thicket of willows offered concealment. They crouched among the trailing branches, barely breathing, as the splashing grew louder. A beam of light swept along the creek, and two figures appeared. Men in dark clothing, moving with the deliberate precision of hunters tracking prey. One of them paused, directing his flashlight toward the bank where Jackson and Elena hid. "See something?" the second man asked, his voice carrying clearly across the water. "Thought I did," the first replied. Jackson recognized the cultured tones of Dr. Erickson from the bedroom confrontation. Probably just an animal. They can't have gotten far on foot. Unless they had help, the second man, presumably Dr. Bennett, said. The Montgomery holdings are too extensive to search effectively without more men. We don't need more attention. Erickson responded sharply. If Wilson starts asking too many questions, Cooper will have our heads. We find them quietly, administer the sedative, and return the woman to the facility. Montgomery can be dealt with later. And the key? One problem at a time. The men continued upstream, their voices fading gradually. Jackson and Eleanor remained motionless for several more minutes, ensuring their pursuers were truly gone before emerging from their hiding place. "Cooper," Jackson whispered as they resumed their journey downstream. "That's a name. Who is Cooper?" Elena's expression darkened. "Nathaniel Cooper, county commissioner. He was my father's closest friend, until he wasn't. And he's behind all this?" Jackson asked incredulously. "A county commissioner orchestrated your family's murder?" "Cooper was just the local connection," Elena replied, her voice hardening. "The money and power behind him came from somewhere else, somewhere with a vested interest in what lies beneath the eastern field." They reached the point where they needed to leave the creek bed and cut across toward the mill road. The land here was open, offering little cover, a risk they would have to take. Moving quickly, they crossed the exposed ground and reached the rutted dirt track that had once served the old grist mill before it closed in the 1970s. Town was less than a mile away now. The first hints of dawn were appearing on the horizon, a faint lightening of the eastern sky that would soon make them more visible to any pursuers. They needed to reach First National before full daylight, and before the bank opened for regular business. "I know Charles Whitman's home address," Jackson said as they followed the old road. "He lives on Oak Street, just behind the bank. If we can reach him before Erickson and his partner alert their superiors that we've evaded them, we might still gain access to the safety deposit box." "And if we can't?" Elena asked. "Then we go directly to the eastern field," Jackson decided. "Whatever evidence exists there has survived 15 years. It can provide answers even without whatever my father placed in that box." They reached the outskirts of Oak Ridge just as the first true light of dawn colored the sky. The town was still sleeping, streets empty, save for the occasional delivery truck preparing for the day ahead. Jackson led them along back alleys and side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where early risers might spot them. Charles Whitman's house was a stately Victorian on a corner lot, set back from the street behind a neatly manicured lawn. Lights were on in what appeared to be the kitchen, The bank president was an early riser, something Jackson had learned during charity board meetings years ago. "Wait here," Jackson instructed, guiding Elena into the shadow of a large oak tree at the edge of the property. "Whitman knows me, but you're supposedly dead. Let me approach him alone first." Elena nodded, though Jackson could see reluctance in her eyes. "Be careful, we don't know who else might be involved." Jackson approached the house openly, taking the front walk to the porch rather than skulking around the property like an intruder. He rang the doorbell, aware that his appearance after a night in the wilderness left much to be desired. The door opened to reveal Charles Whitman himself, already dressed in a crisp business suit despite the early hour. His expression shifted from irritation to shock as he recognized his visitor. Jackson Montgomery. Good heavens, what happened to you?" "I apologize for the early hour and my appearance, Charles," Jackson said smoothly, "but I need a significant favor that can't wait for banking hours." Whitman's bushy eyebrows drew together in concern. "You'd better come in," he said, stepping aside. "Margaret has coffee brewing." Jackson shook his head. "Actually, I'm not alone, and we're in something of a hurry. I need access to a safety deposit box, one my father arranged." Suspicion crept into Whitman's expression. "That's highly irregular, Jackson. Even for the Montgomery family, there are protocols and paperwork for accessing safety deposit boxes, especially ones not registered in your name." "I have the key," Jackson said, producing the small golden key from his pocket. "Box 1215. My father left specific instructions that I should access it in case of emergency. I believe this qualifies." Whitman's gaze flicked to the key, then back to Jackson's face. "What kind of emergency is you showing up at my door at dawn, looking like you've been running through the woods all night?" "The kind where people break into my home with guns and syringes," Jackson replied bluntly. "Oh, the kind where my father's death might not have been from natural causes. Please, Charles, for my father's sake, if not for mine." The bank president's expression softened slightly at the mention of Howard Montgomery. The two men had been friends for decades, serving together on various community boards and charity committees. "Your companion," Whitman said finally. "Who is it?" Jackson hesitated, then decided that partial truth was the only viable option. "Someone my father was protecting, someone connected to whatever is in that box." Whitman sighed heavily, glancing at his watch. "The cleaning crew will be at the bank already. We can enter through the side door without attracting attention. But Jackson, this is the only favor of this kind I will ever grant you, and only because your father saved my son from financial ruin during the recession." "Thank you, Charles," Jackson said with genuine relief. "We'll be quick." Elena emerged from the shadows at Jackson's signal, keeping her head down as they followed Whitman to his car. The bank president gave her a curious glance but asked no questions during the short drive to First National. True to Whitman's word, they entered through a side entrance where the early morning cleaning staff had propped open a door. The bank was eerily quiet, the main floor illuminated only by security lights that cast long shadows across the marble floors. "Wait here," Whitman instructed, leading them to his private office. "I need to disable certain security protocols before we access the vault." As the bank president disappeared down a hallway, Elena finally raised her head, surveying the office with its traditional furnishings and framed photographs of Whitman with various local dignitaries. "We're taking a huge risk," she murmured. "If Cooper has influence over Whitman, Charles Whitman is many things, but corrupt isn't one of them," Jackson assured her. "My father trusted him, and that's good enough for me." Elena didn't appear convinced, but she fell silent as Whitman returned, a ring of keys in hand. "Follow me," he said curtly, "and please understand that I'm violating numerous banking regulations for you, Jackson. Whatever is in that box had better be worth it." The vault was an imposing structure of steel and concrete, its massive door already open for the day's business. Inside, row upon row of safety deposit boxes lined the walls, their brass numbers gleaming in the overhead lights. Box 1215 was located near the bottom of a center section, an inconspicuous position that wouldn't attract attention. Whitman used his master key in conjunction with Jackson's key to remove the box from its slot and place it on a small table in a private viewing room. "I'll give you 15 minutes, Whitman said, checking his watch again. "Then we need to return the box and leave before my staff arrives." As the door closed behind the bank president, Jackson and Elena stared at the unremarkable metal box that supposedly contained answers to 15 years of secrets and lies. "You should open it," Elena said softly. "It was meant for you." Jackson nodded and lifted the lid. Inside lay several items. A sealed envelope with his name written in his father's distinctive handwriting, a USB drive, a small leather-bound journal that appeared well-worn, and something that made Jackson's breath catch, a silver pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather, passed down to his father. "He wanted you to know this was genuinely from him," Elena explained, noting his reaction to the watch. "Something that couldn't be forged or planted." Jackson opened the envelope first, unfolding several pages of heavy stationery covered in his father's precise script. "Jackson," he read aloud, his voice tight with emotion, "if you're reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I am no longer able to complete the work I began. 15 years ago, I made a terrible mistake. I chose silence over truth, business over justice. That choice has haunted me every day since." Jackson paused, meeting Elena's gaze before continuing. "Thomas Blackwood and I discovered something in the eastern field, something that could have changed everything for Oak Ridge County. Not oil or natural gas, as everyone assumed, but something far more valuable and potentially dangerous in the wrong hands. Thomas wanted to announce our findings immediately to secure proper scientific oversight. I counseled patience, further testing, controlled disclosure. While we debated, others learned of our discovery, men representing interests far beyond our small county. They approached us separately, offering partnerships that promised wealth beyond imagination. Thomas refused outright. I hesitated. That hesitation cost Thomas his life, his family, and nearly cost Elena hers as well. Elena's eyes had filled with tears, but she nodded for Jackson to continue. "The fire was no accident. I suspected as much at the time, but lacked proof. When Cooper arranged for a quick closed-casket funeral and hasty demolition of the remains of the Blackwood home, my suspicions grew. But I was a coward, son. I told myself that nothing could bring the Blackwoods back, that speaking out would only endanger you and our family's legacy." Jackson's voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. 3 months ago, during a routine soil analysis of the eastern field, our agronomist discovered anomalies that led me back to the original samples Thomas and I had collected. I began investigating quietly, retracing our work from 15 years ago. That's when I found Elena, alive but imprisoned in a psychiatric facility under Cooper's influence. She is the key witness to what really happened that night. Her testimony combined with the scientific data on the USB drive and the evidence buried beneath the eastern field, will expose not only the murder of the Blackwoods, but a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of state government and beyond. Trust Elena. Jackson, help her bring the truth to light. It's the only way to make amends for my failure 15 years ago. The watch was my father's, and his father's before him. It represents the Montgomery legacy, one I fear I have tarnished with my choices. I hope you can restore it. With love and regret, your father, Howard Montgomery. A heavy silence fell over the viewing room as Jackson refolded the letter. The weight of his father's confession, the guilt, the regret, the plea for redemption through his son, settled on him like a physical burden. "What did you witness?" he asked Eleanor finally. "What happened the night of the fire?" Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I was 16. I wasn't supposed to be home that night. I had a debate tournament in Riverdale, but I came home early with a migraine. I was upstairs in my room when I heard arguing downstairs. My father and several men I didn't recognize. One of them was Cooper. They were demanding something, documents, samples. My father refused. There was a struggle." Her voice faltered. "I heard a gunshot. I hid in my closet, terrified. Then I smelled smoke. They were burning the house with my parents inside. I escaped through the window onto the roof of the garage. One of them saw me, a man with a scar down his left cheek. He chased me into the woods behind our property, but I knew those woods better than he did. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. For years, I moved around, staying with distant relatives or family friends who didn't ask questions. I changed my name, my appearance, but eventually they found me, Cooper's men. They didn't kill me. Instead, they brought me to Oak Ridge Memorial, diagnosed me with delusional disorder, kept me drugged and compliant. Until your father found me," she finished, her eyes meeting Jackson's. "He recognized me immediately, though it had been 12 years. He promised to help me escape, to bring the truth to light, but then he died, suddenly, unexpectedly. I knew I had to act, to find you myself." Jackson absorbed her story, the pieces finally falling into place. "And the eastern field, what did our fathers discover there?" Before Elena could answer, a sharp rap at the door interrupted them. Charles Whitman's concerned face appeared. "You need to leave. Now," he whispered urgently. "Sheriff Wilson just pulled up outside with 2 men I don't recognize. One of them mentioned your name, Jackson." "Erickson and Bennett," Eleanor whispered, fear evident in her voice. Jackson quickly gathered the contents of the safety deposit box, stuffing everything into his pockets. "Is there another way out?" Whitman nodded grimly. "Through the employee break room. There's a door that leads to the alley behind the building. I'll stall them as long as I can." As they hurried through the bank's back corridors, Jackson could hear voices in the lobby, Wilson's distinctive drawl, another voice responding in clipped professional tones. They reached the employee exit just as the voices grew louder, suggesting the group was moving toward the vault area. Outside, the alley was empty, save for a few dumpsters and employees' cars. Dawn had fully broken now, the town beginning to stir with morning activity. "We need transportation," Jackson said, scanning the alley. "And we need to reach the eastern field before they figure out where we've gone." "What exactly are we looking for there?" Elena asked as they moved quickly toward the end of the alley. Jackson patted his pocket where the USB drive and journal were secured. "According to my father's letter, there's physical evidence buried in that field, evidence that will corroborate." His notes and your testimony. We find it, document it, then take everything to the federal authorities. This is clearly beyond local jurisdiction. As they emerged onto a side street, Jackson spotted a familiar pickup truck parked outside the hardware store, Hank Mitchell's old Ford. Hank had worked for Montgomery Farms for over 30 years before retiring. More importantly, he still kept a spare key magnetized under the rear bumper, another rural tradition that might just save them now. "Come on," Jackson said, guiding Elena toward the truck. "I think our luck is about to change." The key was exactly where Jackson remembered, and minutes later they were driving north out of town, taking back roads toward Montgomery Farms. The eastern field lay on the far boundary of the property, as far from the main house as possible while still remaining within Montgomery land. Elena clutched the leather journal, flipping through its pages as Jackson drove. "Your father documented everything," she said with growing excitement. "Meeting dates, names, amounts discussed. He was building a case, piece by piece." "But what was it?" Jackson pressed. "What did they find that was worth killing for?" Elena looked up, her blue eyes bright with vindication after years of enforced silence and doubt. "Water, Jackson. They found water. A massive, pristine aquifer unlike any other in the region, one that could supply the entire southwestern part of the state for centuries." "Water rights?" Jackson frowned. "That's valuable, certainly, but worth committing murder?" "Not just any water," Elena corrected. "Water free from the contaminants that have plagued other aquifers. Water so pure, so perfectly situated, that it could transform this drought-prone region forever. Whoever controls, it controls the future of development, agriculture, industry, everything." And Cooper wanted that control, Jackson realized. "Cooper and the interests he represents," Elena confirmed. "Your father has it all here, the corporations, the shell companies, the political connections. They've been buying up land all around Oak Ridge County for 15 years, positioning themselves for when they finally secure the rights to the aquifer beneath the eastern field." The truck crested a small hill, and Montgomery Farms spread out before them, thousands of acres of crops in neat rows, punctuated by clusters of trees and the occasional outbuilding. In the far distance, barely visible, lay the eastern field, where this story had begun, just hours earlier, when Jackson found Elena lying unconscious amid the wheat. "We're almost there," Jackson said, accelerating slightly, almost to the truth. As they approached the final turnoff that would take them to the eastern field, Elena suddenly gripped his arm. "Jackson, look!" A line of vehicles was visible. Ahead, police cruisers, unmarked sedans, and a large black SUV parked at the entrance to the field access road. Men in uniforms and suits stood in a loose cluster, several of them looking in their direction. "They beat us to it," Elena whispered, dismay evident in her voice. "They know what we're after." Jackson slowed the truck, mind racing through their options. Confrontation wasn't viable. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Retreat meant losing their best chance at securing the physical evidence his father had mentioned. Then he noticed something, a faint trail leading through an adjacent cornfield, barely visible among the tall stalks. A route his father had shown him years ago when teaching him about the farm's irrigation systems. "Hold on," he said, suddenly swerving off the main access road and into the cornfield. "There's another way in." The truck bounced violently as it left the graded road for the rough terrain between corn rows. Behind them, shouts erupted from the group of men, followed by the sound of car doors slamming and engines starting. "They're following," Elena reported, looking back through the dust cloud the truck was raising. "Let them try," Jackson replied grimly. "This is Montgomery land. No one knows it better than a Montgomery." The chase had begun, a race not just to reach the eastern field, but to uncover a truth buried for 15 years beneath the soil of Oak Ridge County. A truth that had already claimed lives and threatened more. A truth that might finally explain why a millionaire farmer crossing his field on a stormy night had found a woman on the brink of death, and why that discovery would leave everyone in tears before the story reached its end. The truck plowed through the cornfield, stalks whipping against the windshield as Jackson navigated the hidden irrigation path with practiced precision. Behind them, their pursuers' vehicles struggled with the unfamiliar terrain, falling farther behind with each passing moment. "My father installed a network of drainage tiles throughout the property years ago," Jackson explained, swerving to avoid a particularly deep furrow. "This service path runs parallel to them all the way to the eastern field. It doesn't appear on any official property maps." Elena braced herself against the dashboard as the truck bounced over rough ground. "Your family really does think of everything." "Generational foresight," Jackson said with a grim smile. "Montgomerys have been planning for disaster since before the Civil War." They emerged from the cornfield into an area of fallow land that separated the crops from the eastern wheat field. Jackson cut the engine and lights, letting momentum carry them into the shadow of a small equipment shed that stood as a lonely sentinel at the field's edge. "We'll have to proceed on foot from here," he said, pulling a small flashlight from the glove compartment. "If my father's journal is correct, what we're looking for is about 300 yards in, near the old oak that was struck by lightning last spring." Dawn had fully broken now, bathing the landscape in a golden glow that would normally be beautiful, but now only increased their visibility to pursuers. In the distance, they could hear engines and voices as the search parties regrouped. "They'll have the advantage in daylight," Elena observed, scanning the horizon nervously. "We need to hurry." They abandoned the truck and moved quickly into the wheat field, trying to disturb the stalks as little as possible. The morning dew soaked their clothing as they pushed through the dense growth, using the rising sun to maintain their eastward heading. The old oak tree soon came into view, a massive lightning-scarred sentinel that had witnessed generations of Montgomery harvests. Now, half dead, its remaining branches reached skyward like gnarled fingers, while the split portion revealed a blackened hollow core. "There," Elena said, pointing to a section of ground near the tree's base that looked subtly different from the surrounding soil, slightly darker, with fewer wheat stalks growing from it. Jackson knelt and examined the area closely. "The soil's been disturbed here more recently than the rest of the field." He looked up at Elena. "We don't have proper tools. This will take time." "Time we don't have," she replied, already dropping to her knees beside him and beginning to dig with her bare hands. "I've waited 15 years for justice. I'm not stopping now." Inspired by her determination, Jackson joined her, scraping away the topsoil with focused intensity. The earth was surprisingly loose, intentionally so, he realized. His father had prepared this site for eventual excavation. "Listen," Elena whispered suddenly, freezing in place. "Voices." Jackson strained his ears and caught the sound. Men, calling to each other, moving methodically through the adjacent cornfield they had just traversed. The search parties were closing in. "Dig faster," he urged, redoubling his efforts. "Whatever's here, we need to find it now." Their fingers worked, frantically, clawing through the soil until, approximately 2 feet down, Jackson's hand struck something solid. He brushed away more dirt to reveal a metal container about the size of a small suitcase. "This is it," he breathed, working his fingers around the edges to free it from the surrounding earth. Together, they lifted the container from its hiding place, a weatherproof ammunition box, military grade, sealed with a combination lock. Jackson turned it over and found a sequence of numbers etched faintly into the bottom, 11 to 2489. My birthday, he realized, quickly rotating the dials to match the date. The lock clicked open. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material, lay several items: a sealed evidence bag containing soil samples, a flash drive similar to the one from the safety deposit box, a folder of documents including what appeared to be original lab reports, and, most surprisingly, a revolver in another evidence bag, along with 6 spent shell casings. "The murder weapon," Elena whispered, her eyes wide. "Your father found it." Jackson quickly examined the paperwork. "These are ballistics reports. He had the gun tested privately, matched it to bullets recovered from your parents' bodies." His voice faltered at the stark reality of what they were holding: physical evidence of a double murder, hidden for 15 years. "And this," Elena said, lifting a small sealed vial of soil. "This is the proof of the aquifer, samples showing the unique mineral composition that makes this water so valuable." A shout from much closer than before jolted them back to their immediate danger. Through the wheat, they could see figures moving purposefully in their direction, multiple searchers now less than 100 yards away. "We need to go," Jackson said urgently, beginning to place the items back in the waterproof container. "No," Eleanor stopped him. "We need to separate these. If they catch one of us, the other might still get away with enough evidence to expose the truth." It was a pragmatic but sobering suggestion. Jackson nodded and quickly divided the materials. Elena would take the original lab reports and soil samples, while he kept the flash drive, ballistics report, and the gun evidence. Each would carry part of the truth, increasing their chances that at least some of it would reach the proper authorities. "Head west through the wheat," Jackson instructed, pointing away from their pursuers. "There's a drainage ditch about a quarter-mile in that direction that leads to Willow Creek. Follow it to the highway and flag down a ride. Get to the FBI field office in Riverdale." "What about you?" Elena asked, clutching her share of the evidence to her chest. "I'll lead them east, toward the old quarry. Create a diversion." Jackson's jaw set with determination. "My father died, trying to bring this truth to light. I won't let his sacrifice be in vain." Elena hesitated, then did something unexpected. She leaned forward and kissed Jackson briefly. "Your father would be proud of you," she whispered. "Be careful." Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared into the wheat, moving low and fast away from their pursuers. Jackson waited until she was out of sight, then deliberately stood up, making himself visible above the wheat stalks. "Hey!" he shouted, waving his arms. "Over here!" The effect was immediate. The searchers changed direction, converging rapidly on his position. Jackson took off in the opposite direction from Elena, running east through the wheat field toward the abandoned limestone quarry that marked the eastern boundary of Montgomery land. His lungs burned as he pushed himself to maximum speed, the evidence secured in his jacket pockets. Behind him, he could hear his pursuers gaining ground, younger men probably, and not tired from a night without sleep. But Jackson had one advantage they didn't: intimate knowledge of every acre of this land. The wheat field ended abruptly at a barbed wire fence, beyond which lay a stretch of rocky ground leading to the quarry's edge. Jackson vaulted the fence with practiced ease, a skill remembered from his youth, and sprinted across the uneven terrain. The quarry appeared ahead, a vast pit of whitish-grey stone cut deep into the earth during the county's early development. Abandoned decades ago, when the limestone vein played out, it had filled partially with groundwater, creating a small lake at its bottom. The edges remained steep and dangerous, marked with warning signs that had aged and faded over the years. Jackson slowed as he approached the rim, evaluating his options. The quarry presented a natural dead end. There was nowhere to go but back the way he'd come, where his pursuers were rapidly closing in. Already he could see the first of them climbing the fence, with Sheriff Wilson among them. A desperate plan formed in Jackson's mind. The quarry's north face featured a series of narrow ledges, remnants of the old mining operation that descended in switchbacks to the water below. They weren't meant as a path, but to someone with rock-climbing experience like Jackson, they offered a possible escape route. He moved north along the rim, reaching the switchback section just as the first pursuers arrived at the quarry's edge. "Montgomery!" Sheriff Wilson's voice rang out. "Stop right there! You're interfering with an official investigation." Jackson turned to face them, carefully positioning himself near the descent point. Wilson stood about 30 yards away, flanked by several deputies and the two doctors from the previous night. A tall man in an expensive suit had joined them, someone Jackson recognized immediately as Nathaniel Cooper, county commissioner, and the man implicated in the Blackwood murders. "Investigation?" Jackson called back. "Is that what you call a cover-up these days, Sheriff?" Wilson's expression darkened. "I don't know what you think is happening here, but you're making a serious mistake. That woman you're helping is dangerous, delusional." "Elena Blackwood is many things," Jackson replied, taking a careful step backward toward the quarry edge. "But delusional isn't one of them. I know everything, Sheriff, about the aquifer, about the fire, about what really happened to Howard Montgomery when he got too close to the truth." Cooper stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. "Jackson, you've always been a reasonable man. Whatever Elena has told you is colored by years of psychiatric problems. We're trying to help her and protect you." "With guns and syringes?" Jackson scoffed. "Your concern is touching, Commissioner." "Think about your legacy," Cooper urged, taking another step closer. "Montgomery Farms has been in your family for generations. Do you really want to throw that away based on the ramblings of a disturbed woman?" Jackson felt a surge of anger. "My legacy? My father's last act was to uncover your crimes, Cooper. He died trying to bring justice to the Blackwoods. That's the Montgomery legacy I care about, not acres or profits." Cooper's facade of concern slipped slightly, revealing a flash of something colder beneath. "Howard was my friend. He understood what was at stake. The prosperity of this entire region depends on developing that aquifer properly. The Blackwoods would have restricted access, tied everything up in environmental regulations and scientific studies." "So you killed them," Jackson stated flatly. Cooper didn't deny it. Instead, he spread his hands in a gesture of pragmatic resignation. Sacrifices were necessary. Progress always demands a price. And my father's death? Was that necessary too? A flicker of genuine regret crossed Cooper's features. "Howard made choices I warned him against. He couldn't let the past rest. Jackson had heard enough. He had Cooper's confession, not that it would matter without evidence to back it up, and that evidence needed to reach the proper authorities. "Neither can I," Jackson said, then turned and leaped off the quarry edge. He heard shouts of alarm as he landed hard on the first ledge about 8 feet below the rim. Without pausing, he scrambled down to the next ledge and the next, descending the quarry face with desperate speed. A gunshot rang out, then another, stone chips exploding near his head as bullets struck the quarry wall. "Hold your fire!" he heard Wilson shout. "We need him alive!" Jackson continued his perilous descent, fingers gripping tiny handholds, boots sliding on the limestone dust that covered each ledge. One misstep would send him plummeting to the water 60 feet below, possibly survivable, but certainly injurious. The sounds of pursuit followed him. At least 2 men were attempting the same descent route, moving more cautiously but steadily gaining. Jackson pushed himself faster, ignoring the burning in his muscles and the cuts opening on his hands as they scraped against the rough stone. 4 ledges from the bottom, disaster struck. As Jackson put his weight on a seemingly solid outcropping, it crumbled beneath him. He fell, tumbling through open air for a sickening moment before crashing onto the ledge below. Pain shot through his left ankle as it twisted beneath him, and he felt something in his pocket crack, the flash drive, possibly damaged. Despite the injury, Jackson forced himself up and continued downward, now moving with a painful limp. Above, his pursuers had been temporarily slowed by witnessing his fall, giving him precious seconds. He reached the quarry bottom, a narrow shore of crushed stone surrounding the deep water. A quick glance confirmed what he remembered from childhood explorations. A drainage tunnel on the quarry's eastern side, built to prevent flooding during heavy rains. If it remained passable, it would lead to the creek system beyond Montgomery. Land. Jackson hobbled toward the tunnel entrance, each step sending spikes of pain through his injured ankle. Behind him, his pursuers had reached the lower ledges and would soon be on level ground. The tunnel entrance was half submerged, requiring him to wade through chest-deep water to enter. Jackson took a deep breath, checking that the evidence was secure in his zippered jacket pocket, then plunged into the cold water. The tunnel was narrower than he remembered and darker, a claustrophobic concrete tube through which quarry water drained into the natural watershed. Jackson pulled himself forward, using the maintenance handrails installed along the sides, moving as quickly as his injured ankle would allow. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 5 minutes, he saw light ahead. The tunnel's exit. He emerged into a natural creek bed, water flowing gently through a series of small pools and shallow rapids. Jackson pulled himself onto the bank, gasping for breath. His ankle throbbed mercilessly, and a quick inspection confirmed it was badly swollen, probably a severe sprain, if not broken. He wouldn't be outrunning anyone in this condition. Voices echoed from the tunnel behind him. His pursuers were close, too close. Jackson forced himself to his feet, scanning his surroundings for options. The creek continued eastward, eventually joining Willow Creek several miles downstream. To the north and south stretched unfamiliar woodland, not Montgomery land, but property he'd never had reason to explore. A decision had to be made quickly. Jackson chose north, reasoning that it would take him farther from town while potentially intercepting the highway to Riverdale, where Elena would hopefully be heading. With her portion of the evidence, he limped into the trees, using branches as makeshift walking sticks when possible, trying to minimize the trail he left behind. The sounds of pursuit faded temporarily, suggesting his pursuers had either lost his trail or split up to cover more ground. The morning sun filtered through the canopy as Jackson pushed forward, each step a test of endurance. His ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and the constant pain made clear thinking difficult. He needed to check the evidence, to ensure it had survived the fall and water. Finding a fallen log for a seat, Jackson carefully extracted the items from his jacket. The flash drive had indeed cracked along one edge, but the main housing remained intact. It might still be readable. The ballistics report was water-damaged but legible. The evidence bag containing the revolver and shell casings was miraculously unharmed. Most importantly, Cooper's confession, his casual admission to orchestrating the Blackwood murders, remained fresh in Jackson's memory. Even if the physical evidence was compromised, that testimony would be powerful, especially combined with whatever Elena carried. Elena, had she escaped, made it to the highway, reached authorities who would listen rather than those controlled by Cooper? Jackson had no way of knowing, but he had to proceed as if she had succeeded. His job now was to preserve his portion of the truth and get it to Riverdale. A distant shout from the direction of the creek jolted him back to his immediate danger. They had found his trail. Jackson gathered the evidence and forced himself upright, resuming his painful journey northward. The terrain grew steeper, the forest denser. Each step required more effort than the last as Jackson's strength ebbed. His ankle could no longer bear weight, forcing him to hop awkwardly, using trees for support. Progress slowed to a crawl. After another hour of this tortuous movement, Jackson heard what at first seemed like a hallucination, the distant rumble of vehicles on a highway. The sound revitalized him, lending new energy to his flagging muscles. The highway meant people, witnesses, potential help. He altered course toward the sound, pushing through increasingly thick underbrush. The highway noise grew louder, until finally, emerging from a particularly dense thicket, Jackson saw it. A 4-lane highway about 50 yards away, separated from the forest by a steep embankment of loose gravel. "That's what Agent Rivera told me," Jackson confirmed, "though I imagine the legal process will take years to fully unfold." Kate nodded thoughtfully. 15 years of waiting. What's a few more? She reached across the table and briefly squeezed his hand. "What you did today, what both of you did, it means something. To everyone who loved the Blackwoods. To everyone who suspected the truth but was too afraid to speak." "My father should have spoken 15 years ago," Jackson said, the weight of Howard Montgomery's confession still heavy on his conscience. "If he had—" "Don't!" Kate interrupted firmly. "Howard made his choices, both then and at the end. He tried to make it right in his own way. Focus on what you've accomplished, not what he failed to do." Before Jackson could respond, the door opened again. Elena Blackwood stood in the doorway, flanked by another FBI agent. Though still pale, she had transformed from the desperate woman Jackson had found in his field just 24 hours earlier. Her dark hair was neatly combed, her borrowed clothes replaced with a simple blouse and slacks provided by victim services. But it was her eyes that showed the most dramatic change. The haunted, hunted look had given way to something calmer, more centered. Her gaze fell on Kate, and for a moment she seemed frozen in place. "Mrs. Wilson," she whispered, using Kate's married name from years ago. "Hello, Moonbeam," Kate replied softly, using the childhood nickname. Elena crossed the room in 3 quick strides and embraced the older woman, tears flowing freely down both their faces. I thought everyone from before was gone." "Not everyone," Kate assured her, stroking Elena's hair as she had likely done when Elena was a child. "Some of us remembered, some of us waited." Jackson watched their reunion with a curious mixture of emotions. Joy at this unexpected connection, a strange sense of privilege at witnessing such a profound moment, and something more complex when Elena finally turned her attention to him. "You made it," she said simply. "We both did," he replied. "The evidence is secure. Cooper and his associates are in custody. It's really over." Elena nodded, absorbing this confirmation of what she'd already been told. "Not over," she corrected gently. "Just beginning differently than before." Agent Rivera returned, professional, but not unkind, as she informed them that they were free to leave, but would need to remain available for further questioning in the coming days. The FBI had arranged hotel rooms for both Elena and Jackson, though Kate insisted that Elena could stay with her if she preferred. "I have a spare room in my apartment here in Riverdale," Kate explained. "I moved here after the fire. Couldn't bear to stay in Oak Ridge with all the whispers and lies." Elena hesitated, torn between the comfort of a familiar face and the safety of anonymity. "I think I need a little space tonight," she said finally, "to process everything. But perhaps tomorrow." "My door is always open," Kate assured her, embracing her once more before departing. Outside the federal building, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city streets. An FBI agent had been assigned to drive both Jackson and Elena to their respective hotels, a precautionary measure, Rivera had explained, until they could be certain all conspirators had been identified and detained. "We're at the same hotel," the agent informed them as they settled into the government sedan. "Different floors, but same security protocols." The drive through Riverdale was conducted in weary silence, each lost in their own thoughts after the intensity of the days. Questioning, Jackson found himself stealing glances at Elena, still marveling at her resilience. 15 years of hiding, captivity, and enforced silence, yet here she sat, unbowed, determined, victorious. The hotel was an unremarkable mid-range establishment, selected more for security than comfort. As they checked in with their FBI escort, Jackson made a decision. "Would you join me for dinner?" he asked Elena as they waited for their room keys. "In the hotel restaurant. I'm not ready to be alone with my thoughts just yet." Elena studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that. Give me an hour to shower and change." They met in the hotel's modestly appointed restaurant, Elena now dressed in fresh clothes, provided by victim services, her damp hair framing her face. Without the immediate pressure of pursuit or the formality of FBI interviews, an awkwardness threatened to descend between them. Two strangers connected by extraordinary circumstances, but little else. "This feels strange," Eleanor acknowledged, as they settled at a corner table far from other diners. 24 hours ago, I was in a hospital gown, drugged into compliance. Now I'm ordering dinner like a normal person. 24 hours ago, I was in Chicago, convinced I'd never set foot on Montgomery land again, Jackson replied with a wry smile. "Life changes quickly. For better or worse," Elena agreed, then paused. "In this case, definitely for better." They ordered, then fell into easier conversation. carefully avoiding the heaviest topics at first, instead discussing the years Jackson had spent building his agricultural technology company in Chicago. "You developed irrigation systems that reduce water usage by 40%, Elena noted, clearly having absorbed details about his life during their frantic journey. "That's impressive." "It started as a graduate school project," Jackson explained. "After I left Oak Ridge, I threw myself into studies, engineering, agriculture, business. Creating something new felt like the only way to escape my father's shadow. Only to discover he cast a different kind of shadow than you thought," Elena observed. Jackson nodded soberly. "I spent 15 years believing he embodied everything wrong with old-school agricultural empires. Stubborn, tradition-bound, environmentally careless. Instead, he died trying to bring justice to my family and protect a precious natural resource," Elena finished for him. "People are complicated, Jackson, even, perhaps especially, our parents." Their food arrived, providing a momentary distraction. As they ate, Jackson found himself studying Elena's face, seeing hints of the photographs he'd seen of Thomas and Margaret Blackwood, her father's determined jaw, her mother's expressive eyes. "Tell me about them," he said suddenly. "Your parents, not as victims or scientists, but as people. I realized today I knew almost nothing about them, despite our family's history." A soft smile transformed Elena's face. "My father was brilliant, but absent-minded. He'd forget to eat when he was working on a project. Mother would bring sandwiches to his lab and stand there until he took at least 3 bites. She laughed softly at the memory. "He loved photography, not just scientific documentation, but artistic shots. He had a dark room in our basement where I wasn't allowed to go until I was 12. "And your mother?" Jackson prompted when she paused. "Practical, precise. She could identify any plant species within seconds. She kept the most beautiful gardens, not showy, but thoughtfully designed ecosystems that attracted specific butterflies and birds." Elena's eyes grew distant. "She made me memorize Latin names alongside common ones. 'Nature respects precision, Elena,' she would say." "They sound remarkable," Jackson said sincerely. "They were." Elena met his gaze directly. "And so was your father in the end. He could have remained silent forever. No one would have known. But he chose truth, regardless of the personal cost." Jackson felt the weight of those words, the implicit forgiveness for Howard Montgomery's earlier failure to speak out. "I wish I'd known that version of him," he admitted. "We were estranged. My last words to him were angry ones." "But your actions now honor him more than any words could have," Elena said gently. "You finished what he started. You brought justice to my family when everyone else had forgotten us." The conversation flowed more easily after that, moving between memories, observations about Oak Ridge County, and cautious considerations of the future. By the time they finished their meal, Jackson felt a connection to Elena that transcended their shared trauma. A genuine appreciation for her intelligence, her perspective, her quiet strength. "What will you do now?" he asked as they lingered over coffee. "After the legal proceedings, I mean." Elena considered the question carefully. "I haven't allowed myself to think beyond survival for so long," she admitted. "I have a doctorate in hydrogeology that I completed under an assumed name before they found me again. I could return to research, I suppose." "The aquifer under the eastern field would benefit from expert analysis," Jackson suggested. especially if we're going to manage it responsibly. We, Elena raised an eyebrow. Montgomery Farms will need guidance on how to protect the resource while making it beneficial to the region, Jackson explained. I meant what I said to Kate earlier. I want to establish a foundation to oversee the aquifer's management. Your expertise would be invaluable. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Montgomery? Eleanor asked with the hint of a smile. I'm suggesting a partnership, Jackson clarified. Our families began this journey together 15 years ago. Perhaps we should finish it the same way. Before Elena could respond, Jackson's phone buzzed with an incoming call, Agent Rivera's number appearing on the screen. Montgomery, he answered, immediately alert. Mr. Montgomery, I'm calling to inform you of a development, Rivera said, her voice professionally neutral. Commissioner Cooper was found unresponsive in his holding cell approximately 20 minutes ago. Paramedics were called, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. What happened? Jackson asked, meeting Elena's concerned gaze across the table. Preliminary assessment suggests a self-administered substance, Rivera replied. We're investigating how he obtained it while in custody. I wanted you and Ms. Blackwood to hear this from me rather than the news. After ending the call, Jackson relayed the information to Elena, watching her face carefully for her reaction. He chose the easy way out, she said finally, her voice steady, rather than face justice in court. Are you disappointed, Jackson asked, that he won't stand trial for what he did to your family? Elena considered the question thoughtfully. I spent years imagining confronting him, forcing him to acknowledge what he'd done. But now... She shook her head slightly. The truth is public now. That matters more than watching him in handcuffs. The others will still face justice, Jackson reminded her. Erickson, Bennett, the corporate interests behind them. And that will have to be enough, Eleanor agreed. She hesitated, then added, Cooper was once my father's friend, you know. Before the aquifer discovery changed everything, they used to fish together on Willow Creek. A sad smile crossed her face. I wonder if he ever regretted his choices, or if he only regretted being caught. They finished their coffee in contemplative silence before making their way to the elevator. As they reached Elena's floor, Jackson found himself reluctant to end their evening. Breakfast tomorrow? He suggested as the doors opened. Before our next round of FBI interviews. Elena nodded. I'd like that. She stepped into the hallway, then turned back. Thank you, Jackson, not just for today, but for believing me from the beginning. That meant everything. After she disappeared down the corridor, Jackson continued to his own floor, his mind swirling with the day's events, Cooper's death, and the quiet intensity of Elena's gratitude. He was exhausted beyond measure, yet oddly energized by the possibilities that now lay before them: justice, redemption, renewal. In his room, he sank onto the edge of the bed, and finally allowed himself to truly feel the enormity of what had transpired. In just 24 hours, his understanding of his father, his family legacy, and his own place in the world had been fundamentally transformed. The burden of uncovering the truth had been heavy, but its revelation brought an unexpected lightness. He thought of Elena, carrying her own much heavier burden for 15 years, and felt humbled by her strength. Whatever partnership they might forge moving forward, professional, personal, or something yet undefined, would be built on a foundation of shared purpose and mutual respect forged in extraordinary circumstances. Sleep came quickly that night, deeper and more restful than Jackson had experienced in years. 6 months later, the eastern field of Montgomery Farms presented a dramatically different landscape. Where once uniform rows of wheat had stretched to the horizon, now a carefully designed research station stood, a low-profile complex of sustainable buildings surrounding the old lightning-struck oak tree that had guarded the field's secrets. For so many years, the Montgomery Blackwood Watershed Research Center had opened its doors just 2 weeks earlier, dedicated to studying and protecting the aquifer while developing new conservation technologies. The legal battles were far from over. Trials for Erickson, Bennett, and several corporate executives were still pending, but the truth had been established beyond question, and the aquifer's future secured through a complex legal framework that prevented its exploitation. Jackson stood on the observation deck of the main research building, watching as a group of environmental science students from the State University toured the grounds. Elena led the tour, her expertise and passion evident even from a distance, as she gestured toward monitoring equipment. "She's a natural teacher," observed Kate, who had joined the center as its administrative director. "Those students have no idea they're learning from one of the nation's leading hydrogeologists." "I think she prefers it that way," Jackson replied. "The spotlight has never been her goal." Indeed, Eleanor had declined numerous media interviews and book offers in the months following the revelations. She had testified where necessary for the legal proceedings, then channeled all her energy into establishing the research center, designing monitoring systems, developing conservation protocols, recruiting a team of scientists committed to the aquifer's protection. Jackson's technology company had relocated its headquarters from Chicago to Riverdale, bringing jobs and innovation to the region. Montgomery Farms continued its agricultural operations, now with more sustainable practices, under the guidance of the Research Center. The partnership that Thomas Blackwood and Howard Montgomery had envisioned 15 years earlier had finally taken shape, though in a form neither could have anticipated. As the student tour concluded, Elena made her way to the observation deck, her face flushed with enthusiasm despite the cool autumn air. "Promising group," she reported as she joined Jackson and Kate. "Two of them asked about internship opportunities for next summer." "We'll make room," Jackson promised. "The educational component of this center is just as important as the research." The three stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the land that had held so many secrets for so long. The eastern field now represented not tragedy and concealment, but possibility and protection. "I received a letter from the governor's office this morning," Kate mentioned, breaking the silence. "They're establishing a scholarship fund in your parents' names, Elena, for students pursuing environmental science degrees." Elena's eyes glistened briefly before she composed herself. "They would have loved that," she said softly. "Education was everything to them." "Speaking of recognition," Jackson added, "the State Water Conservation Board wants to present you with an award next month for your work developing the Aquifer Protection Framework." Elena shook her head with a small smile. "You know how I feel about ceremonies. The work itself is what matters, not the recognition. Sometimes symbols are important," Jackson countered gently. "Not for you, perhaps, but for others. Young scientists who need role models, communities that need to see environmental protection celebrated." "He's right," Kate agreed. "Your parents understood the power of visible advocacy. Remember how Your father testified before the state legislature about wetland preservation. He hated public speaking, but he did it because it mattered. Elena considered this, then nodded slowly. I'll think about it. No promises. As Kate excused herself to return to her office, Jackson and Elena remained on the deck, watching the students board their bus for the return trip to campus. The comfort between them had deepened over the months of working together, a partnership built on shared purpose and gradual mutual understanding. I've been thinking about the old Blackwood property, Elena said after a while. It's still vacant, you know. The county seized it for tax purposes years ago, but no one has ever developed it. Jackson nodded. He had wondered when Elena might turn her thoughts to her childhood home. Do you want to reclaim it? I'm not sure, she admitted. Part of me wants to let it remain in the past. But another part. She paused, searching for words. Another part thinks there might be power in rebuilding something there. Not a replica of what was lost, but something new, something hopeful. Whatever you decide, Jackson said, I'll support it. Elena turned to him with a smile that transformed her face, erasing momentarily the shadows of her past. I know you will. That's been the most unexpected gift in all of this, finding someone who understands both where I've been and where I might go. The simple truth of her words resonated deeply. Their connection had evolved organically over the months. Professional, respect deepening into friendship, friendship gradually opening to the possibility of something more. Neither had rushed this evolution, both understanding the importance of building a foundation unshaded by trauma. The governor's ceremony, Elena said suddenly. Would you attend with me, if I decide to accept the award? Of course, Jackson replied, though he heard the significance behind her casual request, a first step toward acknowledging the personal dimension of their relationship publicly. Good. Elena nodded decisively. Then I'll accept. On one condition, that we use the platform to announce an educational initiative of our own, something that honors both our families while looking forward. What did you have in mind? Jackson asked, already admiring her strategic thinking. A program that brings students from underserved communities to the research center. Elena explained, warming to her idea. Intensive summer internships, college scholarships, mentoring, creating the next generation of environmental advocates. The Montgomery Blackwood Future Stewards Program, Jackson suggested, watching her eyes. Light up at the name. Exactly, she agreed. Our family's legacy shouldn't end with exposing past wrongs. It should extend into creating future rights. As they continued discussing the details of this new initiative, Jackson reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun with a desperate discovery in a stormy field had transformed into something neither could have imagined. Justice for the past, purpose for the present, hope for the future. The eastern field that had once concealed tragedy now nurtured discovery. The aquifer that had prompted murder now sustained research and education. The shattered families that corruption had tried to erase now lived on through institutional legacy and renewed purpose. A millionaire farmer had found a woman dying in his field during a storm, an encounter that had seemed random but proved to be anything but. That moment, that intersection of two lives previously separated by secrets and lies, had set in motion a cascade of revelations that ultimately healed not just two families, but an entire community. As the autumn sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the research center grounds, Jackson and Elena walked together toward the old oak tree, the silent witness that had guarded secrets for 15 years, and now stood as a living monument to truth revealed and justice served. Beneath its spreading branches, where once evidence had been buried in darkness, students now gathered to learn. Where conspirators had once plotted exploitation, conservationists now planned protection. The transformation was profound yet simple. Darkness yielding to light, secrets giving way to truth, pain evolving into purpose. "Your father once told me something I've never forgotten," Elena said as they reached the tree. "During one of his visits to the hospital, when I was losing hope of ever being free again, he said, 'The truth is like water. It may be diverted for a time, even forced underground, but eventually it finds its way to the surface.'" Jackson smiled, hearing his father's wisdom in her words. He was right. He was, Elena agreed, her hand finding his as they stood together in the lengthening shadows. "And now it's our job to ensure that both the truth and the water continue to flow freely for generations to come." The research center buildings gleamed in the late afternoon light, windows reflecting the sunset like beacons of possibility. Inside those buildings, scientists collected data that would protect the aquifer. Educators developed programs that would inspire future environmental leaders, and administrators coordinated outreach that would transform the region's relationship with its natural resources. All of this had emerged from tragedy, from loss, from one man's belated courage and his son's determination to honor it, from one family's destruction and their daughter's miraculous survival, from an encounter in a wheat field during a storm that seemed in retrospect less like chance and more like destiny. As darkness began to fall, lights illuminated the research center grounds, symbolic of the illumination that truth had brought to Oak Ridge County after 15 years of shadows. The Montgomery Blackwood Watershed Research Center stood as a testament to the power of persistence, the triumph of justice, and the endless possibility of renewal. A millionaire farmer had found a woman dying in his field, and in saving her, had ultimately saved himself, redeeming his father's legacy, reimagining his own future, and restoring justice to a community that had almost forgotten how to seek it. The tears that story had once evoked, tears of loss, of pain, of injustice, had transformed into tears of another kind entirely. Tears of healing, of closure, of hope, reborn. And in that transformation lay the most powerful truth of all, that even the darkest secrets, when finally brought to light, could become the foundation for something extraordinary, something that honored the past while embracing the future, something that turned tragedy into triumph, not by erasing what had been lost, but by ensuring it served a greater purpose in the end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.